Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this online presentation of Fire Safety Essentials. My name is Raj, and together with Jim Prosser, my co-host. Say hi, Jim.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks,
Hello.
Jim. And of course, we're very honoured also to have Fiona Lamont on board as well as one of our attendees this morning, and we'll get a chance to talk to Fiona very shortly. But for now, hi, Fiona.
Hello.
Great to have you. Now, what's the purpose of this evening? It's all about trying to share some fire safety information with you. Both Jim and I are very passionate about bringing community messaging, community safety messaging to our communities, particularly during times of fire. Now, survival, risk management, and of course, the preservation of life is our primary focus throughout the course of this presentation. A little bit more about us. Well, first of all, we are both casual employees with the CFA, and we want to deliver messaging and communication with you so that we actually get the message across, that you totally understand the very basics of fire behaviour. I've actually been a volunteer with my local brigade in Woodford, which is not that far from Princetown, actually. For the past 10 years or so, almost 12 years now, actually, if I think about it. What about you, Jim? What's your background?
I was in the corporate world for 20 years, training and educating people, which is quite not as rewarding, I would have to say. CFA, I really enjoy what I do, because you're helping communities and hopefully saving lives. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there is that old adage, and Fiona, you can probably relate to this, that often we say that knowledge is power. Now, I would often rebut that statement when people say that to me, because I think knowledge is potential power. It's only if someone shares something with you and it's going to be beneficial to you, only if you use it. You know, I've worked in the healthcare sector for many years, and we often say that when you ask someone to stop smoking, for example, it's only when they actually take your advice and stop smoking that that knowledge becomes powerful. They've got to use the information that you share with them. So that's kind of the premise under which we are going to carry on with this presentation this evening. It's about sharing our knowledge, something that we're very passionate about, so it makes life safer for yourselves. So, as is traditional, an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Eastern Maar group of Aboriginal peoples who are represented by the Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation. As the traditional custodians of the land on which we are actually hosting this meeting today, and of course where it's been received today as well in Princetown, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and of course any other Aboriginal people here today. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jim, who'll talk a bit more about the technology that we're using today, such that we get good engagement with yourselves. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So we would love to have input from our audience tonight as well, because we can reciprocate, learning in essence. One of the ways that you can communicate with us is through the chat function. Now, of course, you can hear and see us, but we can't hear and see you. So you'll see that on your screen there's a little button in the middle, and there's a tab there that says chat. If you clicked on put your mouse on that and just click on it, you'll see that it opens a box up in the right hand side, which allows you then to type comments in there like Raj has just done. So if you'd like to have a go at using this technology, because webinar might be new to some of our audience tonight, and then you'll see how you can use this function of chat. So if I just ask a simple question, whereabouts would you be joining us from tonight? You can have a go at using the technology, type in come from tonight, and then you'll know how to use the chat function, which would be great. Now, as Raj said right from the beginning, this is a basic fire safety presentation. Obviously, there's a lot more in-depth ones than this. And just for your information also, the session tonight is being recorded, but the only part that's recorded is Raj talking, which will be super exciting, me talking, which would be not quite so exciting, and the actual slideshow. So that's the process. So great. Thank you, everybody. We've got all different people there, Eastern Creek Road, and all parts of probably Princetown. Now, the next function that we could use to communicate with you is through polls. And we're going to launch polls through the session tonight. And this is a way where you can answer the polls. It's not obligatory that you answer the polls. And what we'll do once you've done the poll, we will collate the results and we'll feed the answers back to you. And this is another way you can communicate with us. So I'm going to launch a poll now that you can all participate in if you wish to. There's 4 questions. How long have you lived in the area? Be coming up on your screen. Have you been to a CFA meeting before? How did you find out about this session? And rate your knowledge around fire.
Wonderful.
I think I might have accidentally ended the poll, did I, Raj?
No, it's, well, we can launch it again. That's not a problem.
Okay.
Technology
is a bit slow.
Yeah, let's relaunch the poll, Jim, just to make sure that we're getting our 2 participants.
Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. I think my internet is a little bit patchy, and I thought everybody had answered it when it actually had frozen. So there you go. You can have another go now at answering the questions. I apologise.
Yeah, so it's really, this gives us a good idea of where to pitch our conversation in terms of knowing the knowledge level of our attendees and some history around whether they've actually been to a CFA meeting before. And of course, where did you hear about it? How do we know how you heard about us from? And therefore we can say in the future that, hey, this is a good way of delivering this community messaging. So look, the community notice board is a key place, of course, for information. Lived in the area for less than 10 years, less than 1 to 5 years. And yeah, okay. You've not been to CFA meeting before, that's fine. Thank you. Thanks, Fiona.
How do you rate your knowledge? We have high, so that's good. Okay, so most people have got a bit of an idea about fire safety, which is great. So hopefully we can build on that knowledge tonight. So now I'll stop sharing the results. What we're really trying to do there is demonstrate to you, as well as find out a little bit about you, is to show you how we're going to launch polls, and it enables you to communicate with us. Right, so next slide, please, Raj.
No worries.
What will you learn tonight? So, as you could see from the poll there, people had a bit of knowledge about fire. We're going to hopefully build on that tonight by understanding what the local fire risks are. And of course, I was talking to Fiona a little bit before we started, looking at the type of vegetation we have, and that's what we'll expand on it a little bit further. What to expect from a fire? Fire will move erratically, but there are ways that we can, to a degree, predict some of it. How do you know if there is a fire? Planning and decision making, the decisions you make at this point when there is a fire can be life-saving, and opposite as well. Surviving if all your plans fail and you get caught. So we're talking about the places of last resort tonight as the absolute last opportunity you have if all of your previous plans fail. Okay, so I'll hand back over to Raj. Thanks, Raj.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. So let's get the ball rolling on this. Let's set the scene. What's the context? Okay. Well, first and foremost, the FSC or Fire Safety Essentials program is tailored for your locality. It's tailored for the locality of Princetown and the surrounding areas. We've looked at the location, and this particular presentation is particularly focused on Princetown because it has a very high fire risk rating, a VFRR of 1, which means extreme. So this is why this is very important for our communities of Princetown to understand some of the basics when it comes to fire safety. Background. Princetown is located in the locality or the municipality of Corangamite Shire. The township borders both Port Campbell and the Great Otway National Parks and is connected to the Great Ocean Walk by a very picturesque wetland boardwalk. And I, myself and my family have often gone down there and did a bit of swimming in the river mouth there as well and stayed down at the campsite. Princetown offers lots of outdoor activities, including fishing opportunities in the estuary, always very busy and very popular. And of course, the ocean beaches and direct access to the national parks and other trails and lookouts as well. Magnificent beaches. It is sort of the real estate of the Southwest, if you would like, you know, the Great Ocean Road. And you are very fortunate, as Jim said at the beginning, to live in such a big, beautiful part of the world. But look, you must take also into consideration that with this natural beauty comes the ever-present threat of fire. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to explore the Victorian landscape a bit more in detail now. Before I do that, let me just tell you that as of the 2016 census, the population of Princetown was 241 individuals, residing in a total of 109 homes. There's a fair chance that has gone slightly increased now. Population of Princetown has been on the increase for a number of years, and rightfully so in terms of the locality and its natural beauty. So 241 living across 109 homes. Let's just delve a bit more now. As I spoke about earlier, let's talk about the Victorian landscape. Fire, without a shadow of a doubt, has been present in the Australian continent for millions of years and has been significantly shaping much of the landscape. Many fires were started by lightning. Aboriginal people, the people of the Eastern Maar, used fire for many thousands of years to care for country. These fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands. The fires also served to enhance hunting, reduce levels of fuel, and we'll talk about fuel and fuel load very shortly. Also, the fires kept the vegetation from becoming too dense and hence hard to walk through, particularly when it came to hunting. Bushfire records only really started in earnest around about 1851. The slide that you're looking at the moment shows the range of landscapes that we have throughout Victoria. And we have all the usual suspects. We have an extensive amount of grassland, bushland. There are also mountainous forested areas, and I mentioned the Otway National Forest earlier on. And of course, farmland. So let's consider the state. Let's consider a breakdown of the state as shown on the slide that you're viewing. This map shows the different weather districts, okay? So these weather districts have their own level of fire risk. This fire risk is dependent on a number of factors. Let's talk about topography as one of those key factors. What do I mean by topography? I mean the lay of the land. I mean the hills, the valleys, the gorges, the river creeks, the natural erosion that occurs that creates these forms of depressions in the landscape. Often we call it the lay of the land. This is a key factor that will affect fire in a particular locality. Another thing that we need to take into consideration as we look at the southwest of Victoria and the township of Princetown, along the coast there, is the seasonal outlook. What does the seasonal outlook mean? Well, this describes the overall weather trend of what's happening in each weather district. So the southwest will have its own seasonal trend and it'll be defined by its topography. Now, the new spring outlook shows the increased risk of grass fires. Victoria, without a shadow of a doubt, I know we talk about California and the US, but Victoria is by far one of the most bushfire prone parts of the world. The latest weather data shows that parts of Victoria are forecast to have a wet spring, the La Nina effect. The rain will start just as it did about 3 hours ago here in Woodford. After a glorious day, the rains have arrived, as they have been predicting for a number of days now, and we are in for a wet spring. What does this mean for the lay of the land? What does it mean for the growth of grass and fuels in your locality? Well, rain, as plentiful as it's going to be, is going to mean that we'll get extensive and rapid grass growth. This means that there is an increased potential for fast-moving grass fires, particularly as this fuel load dries or cures. With increased curing during the summer, during the warmer times, the fuel load will be available for ignition or for lighting. There is no doubt that because of this high chance that these grass fires will move quickly and have the increased risk or potential to threaten properties and life. And I'd just like to quote something that our chief officer said recently, which is, like every season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could happen due to this high fuel load. And to add the icing on the cake, and without being too alarmist, new climate research by the CFA reveals that the number of high-risk bushfire days could triple in some parts of Victoria by the end of the century. So that's a startling fact in itself. I'm going to hand over to Jim now as we discuss the local vegetation around Princetown. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Raj. So each area has its own unique vegetation. We have to remember that Australia is the driest continent in the world, with only 1% of the world's usable water. So it's a very dry place. You know, maybe not so much around the Otways where you get high rainfall, probably the highest in Victoria. But if you looked out your window, you can use the chat function if you wish to. What sort of vegetation do you see? Well, I think these slides there are typical of what you would see around your area. As Raj said, the outlook is for high growth of grasslands, and we did a one of these sessions last week in around just east of Cold Lake last week, and even the CFA captain there was caught in a grass fire, and even he was surprised how fast a grass fire moved in one of the events they had there. So grass fires will move very quickly. The other thing that you've got, I think, as Fiona said earlier, you know, you've got these really rich soils there, which means you get really really good growth of tall timber trees. So you'll also get ember attack as well. These things are going to make it quite difficult to defend around your area if you get one of those very bad fire days. So now, as well as that, you have the area is quite, you know, rolling hills, and in some areas quite steep, the hills. So every 10 degrees rise in a hill, it will double the speed of a fire. So that's an added danger that you have in your area. So we're talking about, you know, a lot of vegetation, hills, dry zone, and high fuel loads. If that's all fanned by strong northerly winds, then, you know, you've got a problem, haven't you, really? So that's your local vegetation. What about local risks? What do you think your local risks would be? Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll launch a poll, and you can answer the question, what you think your local risks would be. Now, this is a multiple choice question. You can pick any one of those answers there that you see on the list. Coming up now. There you go. You can pick any one of those answers you see there, and you can have multiple picks if you wish to. If you think it's all of them, you can tick all of them. So you've got high fuel loads, high tourist areas in summer, potential speed of grass fires, numerous grass fires sparked by embers, narrow winding roads. Everybody took my advice. They almost answered everyone. And tree limbs, I'll share the results.
Oh.
There you go. But you're right. All of these things are risks in your area. High fuel loads, as Raj talked about, the outlook is that there is going to be high fuel loads. You've got grass fires, that's correct. Numerous grass fires sparked by embers, yeah, because you've got tall trees and they could carry a long way. Narrow winding roads, yeah, you don't have a lot of ways to get in and out. So that's definitely correct. Tree limbs hanging over excess roads, and again, the trees in your area are tall and they could fall with strong winds, and you know that's a risk as well. And the other one that 50% answered was high tourist areas in summer, and again, that's a risk, a big risk for you guys, because people that, I'll just use an example, potentially people that come from Melbourne potentially don't understand the fire risks, having not lived in a rural area potentially. So that brings risk to your particular beautiful part of the world. And secondly, if there is a fire and you've got caravan after caravan after caravan trying to get out of town, blocking the roads, again, that could be a risk for your particular area as well. So all of those things, and typically, you know, the things you see in the pictures there, again, they're the risk to your particular area. Okay, I'll hand back over to Raj. Thanks, Raj, and he's going to talk about the local resources that are available for you and and then we'll talk about what to expect from a fire.
Fantastic, thanks, Jim. So look, having spoken to the local CFA captain on a number of occasions, Leslie Gass, I think it's important to acknowledge the work of the local brigade. They are a volunteer organisation. They work tirelessly 24/7 to try and keep the community safe. Now, the Princetown Brigade, Leslie tells me, has a membership of about 16 members, not all active members, but you know, a handful of active members. They have an unprecedented task to look after the community as best as they can with the resources that they have. And as we mentioned at the beginning, with a population of 241 individuals living across 109 residences, that are farms, businesses, homes, stretched over quite a large area actually, they have at their disposal one tanker. That's all they have. Now, if you consider a bad fire day, the tanker and the crew may well be pulled in many different directions. Their priority will be to protect Princetown, but it might be that neighbouring areas might need their services as well. So I often pose a very rhetorical question here for Fiona and Rob around, well, how realistic is it to expect a full crew and the tanker at your home, at your business, at your farm on a bad fire day? It's quite a, you know, if you do the numbers, the number crunching, it's not rocket science, is it? And this is why the underlying theme behind this presentation is for you to understand how dangerous fire is, how unpredictable fire behavior can be. And as Jim describes, some of the factors that infect fire behavior, like the terrain, the topography, like the wind, will affect the intensity of that wind. What we encourage you to do is to take ownership of this critical situation. Be out of harm's way ahead of time. Have a plan, activate that plan, and be out of harm's way. So let's explore that a bit further. What to expect from fire? Well, first of all, we all know that Victoria's had a lot of fires. 2 summers ago, we saw huge fires in multiple parts of the state. And Princetown is no stranger to fire activity and fire behaviour. Let's really get underneath the skin of fire. And I'm going to do that in quite a graphic way right now. I'm going to show you an animation Now, this animation is designed to really make you think about fire. It could be distressing, and some of you might find it emotionally upsetting. This particular presentation will last for about 2.5 minutes or so. If it's such that you feel in any way impacted, please look away for 2.5 minutes and then come back. But let me just preempt the animation by telling you that in grassland areas like Princetown, there are a number of threats to your home and your property. The first one is what we call direct flame damage. And as the name suggests, this is direct flame impact on your home. What do I mean by that? Quite simply, if you have fuel to your doorstep, you will have fire at your doorstep. How do we mitigate this? How do we stop this happening? We create a break in that line of fuel that links to your home. This can be done by creating a driveway, breaking that continuity of fuel so the fire doesn't run up to your door, by creating a vegetable patch, an area of non-combustible fuel. So that's direct flame damage. The second one is ember attack. And this is the big one for us. Jim mentioned the word ember attack earlier on in the presentation, but what is ember attack? Let me just play this animation for you now to give you some idea of exactly what it is that we mean by ember attack. Thank you.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of meters into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometers beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Now, I've actually viewed that presentation a number of times, and every time it sort of strikes home to me. It's very graphic and it's very real. Would you like to be under the influence of a ember attack, knowing what you know now about its danger and its degree of fatality that it can cause. I think I might just leave Jim to say a few words about radiant heat while I prepare the next animation. But I hope the one that we've shown you gives you some idea of just how fires actually spread, and the comparison to Black Saturday and the extent to which embers were a prime cause in spot fires ahead of the fire front. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Raj. I was doing a visit on a property just last week, and a gentleman kept this stick of amber that landed on his roof. It was about a foot long and the size of a pencil. And it was so, he couldn't believe that the ember was so big he actually kept it. That's how dangerous ember attack can be. But moving on to radiant heat. Radiant heat is the thing that will actually be the silent killer ahead of the fire front. Again, this animation that's going to be shown is quite graphic, so if you need to move away from the screen, then feel free to do so. But radiant heat, if you think about a radiant heater that you'd have, that emits about 1 kilowatt of heat. And, you know, a fire front with radiant heat can be 1,000 times stronger than that. So it shows you the danger that you could be in if you're in the way of radiant heat. The other thing about radiant heat, you can protect yourself against it to a degree by getting the animation that comes up in just a moment. So in this animation, you'll see all the technical information behind radiant. It'll help explain the dangers of radiant heat, because radiant heat is the killer. You'll be dead well before the fire front arrives, most likely.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved, natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
Thanks, Raj. So you can see that radiant heat is the killer, and you need to be, that's why the CFA advocate leaving early, because you're going to protect yourself, A, from ember attack, and you can see the catastrophic effects it has there. It could block roads. Your egress might be severely compromised. And secondly, radiant heat can be a killer. And you can see from this slide shot here, whilst the heat hasn't, whilst the sign hasn't been burnt or the house hasn't been burnt by direct flames, the radiant heat is so strong it melted the paint off the wall, melted the graphics off of those signs. So that's the danger of radiant heat. It's the silent killer of the fire. After bushfires go through, CFA generally interview the people that experienced it. And just on the screen at the moment, we've plonked up some comments that people have made. So why would you want to put yourself in harm's way? Imagine a tsunami was coming, you were sitting on the beach. Would you stay there? No, you wouldn't. You'd get away from the tsunami. So I'll give you a moment just to read those comments there. Yeah, so you see the comments there. Why would you stay on, you know, unless you're extremely well prepared and you've got the manpower to defend a property, you need to put yourself and the family out of harm's way. So I'll hand back over to Raj. Thanks, Raj.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Look, I hope you can in some way envisage the picture that we're trying to paint for you here. It's a very clear picture. Fire is danger. Let's not be there. We've tried to explain that it's actually a very stressful and traumatic environment, and I think the animations do that for you. We've tried to explain the unpredictability of what can happen in a fire situation with the blockage of roads, egress or exit routes not being available. We've tried to explain to you the two main elements of fire, ember attack and radiant heat. They are the killers. Radiant heat is the silent killer. All of this impacts your decision to make, your ability to make good decisions. They spoke about the effect on the brain, heat stroke, and death. Do we really want to be in that environment? I think not, because I think we need to have a plan, a fire plan, and stick to it. So let's explain that a bit further. How do we know if there is a fire? Sounds like a very obvious question. So in the chat function, just let me know, how would you know, Fiona, Rob, how would you know that there was a fire in your area? What's your go-to at this moment in time? And while you're giving me some responses there, let's talk about the fire danger rating, the FDR. I'm sure that you're familiar with this symbol. It is a sign that appears generally on the approaches to our localities, to our townships, roadside sign generally. Some of the newest signs are now digitally lit. The old-fashioned ones still have the arrow. You also find them outside CFA stations, on the television, and also on social media. But let's just dispel some myths here around, okay, let me just check my chat function first. Exactly what is it? Okay, Fiona, you would look for smoke, smell, ABC, the Vic emergency app. These are all 100% correct answers. They are the go-to to find out exactly what fires are happening in fire locality. And the same with yourself, Rob. If you see smoke, you know there's something not quite right. You are using your senses, and that's really important. Apologies for the chat window being too small, Rob, but you've done a great job there to answer that one question for us on there. But stay with us on this as we peel back the layers of information that are available to you to be more informed. So the fire danger rating. Jim, let's launch that poll and find out a bit more about what is it that people understand the fire danger rating to be. Thank you. And while you're doing that, I'll just talk a bit more about the FDR. It is a scale of low to moderate to code red, increasing severity of fire conditions. The main take-home message from the FDR is that it doesn't necessarily need to be a severe or a particularly extreme day for it to be a bad fire day. If the conditions are right, you can get a bad fire day at the lower end of the spectrum as well. More about that shortly. So here's the poll that Jim has just launched. It's asking 3 questions. The first one is, what does the fire danger rating actually mean? We want to dispel some of the ideas that folks have around what it means. And also, does anyone know how many code red days have happened in your region in the last 5 years? And finally, the last question is, does anyone know how many severe or extreme days have happened in this region in the last 5 years? Thank you both for answering those questions. We'll end the poll now, Jim, and share those results. Fantastic. Well, first and foremost, the correct answer to what the FDR actually is, it's actually an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. So that's it. We've dispelled one understanding already. So we're all learning from this. Thank you for trying. Secondly, the number of code red days that have happened in our region in the last 5 years have actually been 0. There have been none in the Princetown and Southwest area in the last 5 years. However, we have had 2 severe or extreme days in the region in the last 5 years. So that's just a bit of background information for you. Thank you once again. What I'd like to do now then is let's just close out of that now and talk about in a more detailed look at what we mean by severe, extreme, and code red. Well, on a severe day, we can expect hot, dry, and possibly windy conditions. Hot, dry, possibly windy. If a fire starts on a severe day and takes hold, it may be uncontrollable. Maybe. Let's talk about extreme. Expect extremely hot, dry, and windy conditions. There's no possibly windy, it will be windy on an extreme day. If a fire starts and takes hold, it will most definitely be uncontrollable. It'll also be unpredictable as well as fast moving. And that's where the factor of the wind comes in. The wind is the driver for the fire. And of course, it'll be fast moving because of the high amount of fuel load available. Spot fires will start, as we saw in the Ember attack animation. They will move very quickly and will come from many different directions, again, driven by that all-important wind. Let's talk about code red, the extreme right of the FDR, the fire danger rating. Now, the code red condition, these are the worst conditions for a bush or a grass fire. Our Australian homes are definitely not designed to withstand conditions of this type. Naturally, the best place to be is to be away from this high-risk area. What I'd like to do now is stress and make a real point of stressing that armed with this knowledge, knowing a bit more about the FDR, use these as a trigger point. Use the severe, extreme, code red or high as your triggers to leave and leave early. Leaving the night before a predicted severe, extreme or code red day or on the morning of is going to be a great option for you to do. Know where you're going to go. Know when you're going to go, who you're going to take with you, how you're going to travel, the direction that you're going to go. All this thought needs to be given in preparation for getting away before the danger arrives. Let's move on now a bit more as we explore the realm of information. Now, we live in a very busy world, and this slide is designed to give you some idea of that busyness of information. I call it infobesity, an overload of information. Information that comes to you left, right, and center. A conversation with Frank over the fence while you're pruning the roses. Maybe a chat with Aunt Florrie in the coffee shop as you're walking down the high street in Princetown. Maybe you've heard something on local radio or one of the social media platforms which have got a plethora of information. This information overload or infobesity is referred to as informal sources of information. Not everything that we hear or read is accurate, despite good intentions. Now, if you're going to make judgment calls or decisions about your safety based on information, it's absolutely critical that you check the authenticity or the validity of that information. And this is why we refer you to the following 8 platforms or sources of information. As opposed to informal, these are formal sources of information. They are real-time, evidence-based platforms. By far the most important one of these, I would have to stress, is the Vic Emergency app. And I think, Fiona, you mentioned that in one of your responses as a means of keeping in touch. 100%. The Vic Emergency app is a real-time, life-saving app that can be placed, loaded onto your mobile phone as a source of information of fire activity in your area. It can be used to monitor fire activity and also plan your escape route. The other one that I'd like to pay attention to is the local news. Now, let me set the scene for you here. To be in a fire situation is a very dangerous place. It's dark, it's disorientating, it's noisy, it's smoke-filled, it's a toxic environment, and most of all, it's very disorientating. In a fire situation, communications often go down, so mobile towers will not function as effectively, if at all. Your only means of keeping in communication with the outside world is through a battery-operated radio, tuned to a local emergency station like 774 ABC. This will be your lifeline to the outside world and could make the difference between life and death. I'm not going to labor too much on the other areas of information, of formal information sources, other than to say, be aware of them and understand that they are available. Let's just delve a bit deeper into the Vic Emergency app. This features a triage of information that comes across the app. The number one thing is, do not wait for these warnings. Use them as a trigger to plan your escape, plan your departure on an impending bad fire day. The advice message, purely advice, as the name suggests, there's something happening, be aware. The watch and act, a bit more descriptive, watch and act. If you feel that you need to act, act. Use it as your trigger and be out of harm's way. There could be a situation developing nearby. It could get worse. Monitor, watch and act. And by far the top of the tree, the emergency warning, double exclamation marks in red, danger. You are about to be impacted. Fire is not far away. It's too late to leave. Take action to protect yourself. You are going to be impacted. I also need to make mention to the evacuation as part of this Vic emergency triage. And the Vic evacuation is really recommended, or procedures are in place for you to evacuate. Community information is just that. Notice of a fire that has happened, details of that incident, mainly for community information as a source of letting you know what's going on, but there's no further threat to the community. Do not wait for a warning. When I say do not wait for a warning, because sometimes you can be ahead of the warnings. And I think as Jim is about to explain in the next presentation. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. Yeah, so you could actually be ahead of the warning in the sense that the Victoria Emergency app, it may not be representative of what you're experiencing outside your window. And the reason for that is it actually takes time for the fire to get reported, verify it, and go through the process, you know, in the triage of warnings. So if you look at this timeline here, the fire starts on the far left-hand corner there. Somebody has to notice the fire and they also have to report it in 000, don't they? So it's not immediately, it's on the Vic Emergency app. That could take, as you can see on the timeline there, 5-10 minutes before that happens. And meanwhile, the fire is keeping progressing and moving in direction, isn't it? And particularly with a strong wind behind it. Once it has been verified, then of course it'll come up as an advice message. And again, the fire is actually just keep on building, isn't it? By 20 minutes, it might move in its warning from just advice to possibly emergency warning. Just because there is a triage doesn't mean that the triage is going to be used. So it might go from advice to emergency warning because it progresses so fast. And people need to, take action immediately. So that whole time the fire is burning along, isn't it? And it's only going to get bigger as it moves along unless it can be controlled. So that's why you need to use your own sensors to a degree. So whilst the Victoria Emergency App is fantastic, there is a limitation as well. So how do we overcome that? Well, you need to use your own common sense and also use your own sensors. Now, I think somebody said in that chat earlier, how do you know if there's a fire? And somebody said smell the smoke. So again, that's a common sense approach. If you smell smoke, don't ignore it. Go in and have a look. On these really hot days, don't just pull down your curtains or blinds. Turn the air conditioner on and just say, oh, everything's fine. It may not be. So again, use your senses. If you smell smoke, go and investigate. If you can hear emergency vehicles with sirens going past your house, go and find out what's going on. And likewise, have a look outside the window. If you can see smoke, then that tells you something, doesn't it? There's a fire on, and you could be in harm's way. So let's have a look at a possible scenario now. Sorry, planning and decision making. So at this particular point, you need to plan, don't you, really? And the decisions you make can be life-saving. If we fail to make the right decision based on right information, then they can be catastrophic as well. So it's important we rely on reliable sources and we use our own common sense as well, as we just learned about. So let's have a look at a possible scenario here. It's a hypothetical. Let's just say it's a typical Wednesday morning and you head off to work, or say Port Campbell, whatever town you might work in around the area. And you notice that it's an extreme day. So you can see on the slide there, it's the red extreme day. As you're driving to work, you can see these trees are being buffeted by these strong northerly winds, and there's leaves falling off and there's little twigs flying across the road. You can feel the heat through the car window as you're driving along. It's one of those very extreme days. So there's a risk of, there's a definite risk of fire, even if you haven't checked the extreme FDR rating. At lunchtime, you hear some of your colleagues talking at work, and they say, look, there's been a fire out near Princetown. So you get onto the Victoria Emergency App and you see it's not a far distance from your home. So now you have a decision to make, don't you? What are you going to do? So let's say, one of the options would be to jump in your car and go and protect your property, for example, or gather up some things. As you get halfway to back to Princetown, the road's cut off by the police. They're only letting emergency vehicles through. Now, that creates a problem for you, doesn't it? It means that you've got potentially nowhere to go and you're unprepared for the circumstances that day, that extreme day, is thrown in your way, doesn't it? So what does that mean? Did you want me to launch the poll? Right?
Yes, please. Yeah, let's launch the poll about what this means to those people under those circumstances. Yeah.
There you go. So you got 3 questions there to answer. Where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? So we just learned about the scenario where somebody was going to work. think about last summer, would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency situation like the one we just talked about? And 3, last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with some clothes, important documents, photos, medicines? I'll give you a moment just to answer those questions.
I think while Rob and Fiona are answering those questions, I think I'd just like to say that as we take you on this journey through the presentation, we're trying to provide you with all the tools that you have at your disposal now, like the fire danger rating, like your understanding of the Vic Emergency app, like your understanding of fire behaviour. And on all of these will hopefully allow you to make more informed decisions about what you do to stay safe. This particular set of questions asks about your level of preparation. How much did you think ahead of time that, well, look, it's an extreme day. Maybe I shouldn't be going to work. Maybe I should be grabbing my emergency bag and being out of here. So it's great that you're able to answer these questions honestly and frankly, because it then allows us to build your knowledge about staying safe. So, Jim, do you want to address some of those responses, please?
Okay, thanks, Rush. So where would you be on the average Wednesday? One's at work, one's at home. In an emergency situation, would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency situation like this? And both answers were no. So there's a learning there that we can think about. But last summer, did you have an emergency packed with some clothes, important documents, photos and medicines? And the response, no. So again, there's a learning, the types of things you'd want to put in an emergency pack, because you could be caught in this particular circumstance. We learned about the beautiful part of the world you live in and the risks that it could throw up against you. And with the beauty comes risks, unfortunately, you know, tall trees, beautiful vegetation, but it brings risks. The types of things you'd want to put in an emergency kit would be, like you see there, clothes, your mobile phone. You would want to put in any medicines, any prescriptions you might need, maybe a couple of bottles of water. And think about COVID, you might need a couple of masks and some, you know, whatever else you might need for that scenario. And possibly you might need your vaccination passport going forward. So these are all things that you'll need to keep yourself ahead of the ball, ahead of the curve.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Jim.
So I'll hand back over to Raj, because he's now got another scenario.
Yeah, so it's the same day, except we just can change the scenario slightly, because this time when you jump on your Vic Emergency app, you see that the fire is still a way away. It's not quite impinging on that small yellow shaded area on your phone. So you think to yourself, okay, I've got time here. I've got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff, okay? So you drive home safely and you get out your car on your driveway, and the moment you step out onto the driveway, you smell smoke. So you're already using your senses, you've been very intuitive. It's still really windy and hot, typical of an extreme day. Windy, hot. You check the app again, and you see the little yellow triangle on your screen is still an advice message. It hasn't moved from that, and we know what an advice message is, purely that. You should have enough time, you think to yourself. You frantically run around the house, grabbing those important things, and start that sort of mental checklist as you're going through. Passport, check, photographs, check, license, check, medication, check, pets, check. And you keep running these stuff out to the car every now and again. And every now and again, you check to see that your phone and you've not been told to evacuate. Still nothing. So you still think you've got time, right? You're running through all that list in your head, and this is actually taking a lot longer than you thought, a lot longer. And as we spoke about earlier, when we're under pressure, we can't think straight. Things do not go to plan. The stress burden is so high that you want to stay safe and get all the things, but you find it difficult to concentrate. The heat, the smell, the disorientation is getting to you. Then on the third time that you come out to the car to put things into the back of the car, you notice little patches of smoke coming from the garden bed and in that pile of leaves that you've been meaning to rake up. Embers have started falling near your home, into the spouting, and you feel that surge of adrenaline rush through your body, as is the case in a sort of crisis situation. And you think to yourself, you're out of time. The one question I would like to pose to both of you, Rob and Fiona, is what is the one thing that you could have done differently to avoid this situation? Now, what do you do? What is it that you do in this situation? Where are you going to go? You're surrounded by fire, embers are falling around you. Can you still drive out the street? You think to yourself. Is the road going to be blocked? Is there somewhere safe that you can go? Do you stay at home? Do you grab that small hose pipe that you've got there and try and put those small fires out? These are all decisions that you have to make, and that's without taking into consideration other people. It may be that you care for someone, family members, a vulnerable member of the community, a disabled person, a neighbor that's confined to his or her home. So you have that emotional attachment involved with all the pressure that you're currently under. Where are the kids? Where are they? Is young Joey still at football practice and Sarah at netball practice or down at piano lessons? Was someone picking them up from school that day? What was the plan? It's interesting, isn't it? Do you have horses? Do you have livestock? Do you have animals? Do you have other things that you have to look after and be responsible for? Now, this probably feels like a lot to take on right now, a lot of questions that I'm constantly bombarding you with about the what ifs and who's looking after that. A lot of these you may not even have considered until I actually pose these questions. And look, the interesting thing here is that this is without the stress of there being an actual fire happening. This is very much a hypothetical, a pretend situation. We've introduced this pretend situation to give you some idea of the intensity of fire and the life-saving decisions that have to be made before the fire arrives. Having a plan, using triggers, and knowing when it's safe for you and your family and your community to leave a high bushfire or grass fire area, that's the key. Now, one thing we should have mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is that you don't need to take any notes here. All the information relating to the comments that both Jim and I are making are available in the resources tab at the end of the presentation. There's actually a very good fire plan template that's available through the downloads that you can actually download, sit down with your family, your community, your loved ones, and make a fire plan. Practice the fire plan and understand that everyone is on the same page with that fire plan. So you have a scenario like this, for example, and be out of harm's way. So Rob and Fiona, what could you have done differently in this instance? Just say something in the chat function, or Fiona, if you want to say a few words on air, feel free to do that. It's all about thinking ahead, isn't it? It's about making that plan.
I would have my bags packed and have the plan so you just don't waste time. You just have to have a bag packed in summer. Absolutely.
And the bag is of all the essential items that you yourself need. You know, if you're an asthmatic, you'll need your inhalers. If you're on special medication of any kind, you've definitely got to have that in there. But also the everyday things like a torch, a mobile phone charger, items of identification, things on a flash drive. These are all essential. And can you see how much time that would save in a situation like this? It's a no-brainer as far as the CFA is concerned, in terms of that level of preparation and responsiveness to fire that we try and promote as much as possible. And of course, the Vic Emergency app is a definite one to have on your mobile phones, as I mentioned earlier. There will be bushfire planning workshops to be planned for the Princetown area, and I'll let your captain Leslie know about those so he can inform the community. So let's move on. I'd like to just make a couple of references to the scourge that is unfortunately COVID-19 and coronavirus. Now, as the slide says, you know, you can actually leave a high fire risk area in a day of high fire danger, and you can travel for the purpose of preparing your property for the fire season. However, a couple of things that I should mention is that if you're in quarantine during the time of a fire event and due to coronavirus, you can leave your home if it is unsafe under fire attack, but you must try to get yourself back into self-isolation as soon as possible and as safely as you possibly can. If you are unwell or have symptoms, isolate yourself from others naturally. Ensure that you always wear a face covering and get tested as soon as possible. That's a given. You know, we're so used to that now, it's hardly worth me even saying it because we all know that we do that. Now, a couple of interesting bits of information that were hot off the press last week. As of Wednesday, the 6th of October, property owners can apply to their local council for permission to travel to another property to undertake fire and emergency preparedness activities, as of last Wednesday, the 6th of October. From Monday, the 11th of October, again, the beginning of this week, property owners with approval from the local council will be able to travel to their properties to undertake permitted fire and emergency preparedness activities. So that's assuring you that you can do all the activities you would do to keep your property safe during the coming fire season. Let's move on. Survival options if your plan fails. This is now the final part of our presentation. Thank you both for hanging in there, and thank you for the comments that you're making. I'll hand over to Jim as he takes us through to this final part of our presentation. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. So now you might have had really good plans in place, so they didn't come to fruition or they failed. So now you've got fire on your doorstep or you're trapped within a fire zone. What can you do? Well, first thing you need to do, as we learned earlier with radiant heat, is you need to cover up. You can block the radiant heat, you know, touching your skin by actually covering your body with clothing, such as you see in the photo there. You need a hat on. You need eye protection because the heat and the embers potentially will be driven into your face. Need mask. Protect yourself from breathing in a degree of fumes. Natural fiber clothing, no synthetics, tough leather gloves, and sturdy boots with wool or cotton socks. No point wearing runners, they'll just melt. You always see the joker on the roof in thongs and t-shirts with a garden hose trying to put a fire out or trying to protect their property. You know, they're exposing themselves to radiant heat, which is the ahead of the fire front. Likewise, if you're caught out, you can shelter behind a solid object. Maybe it's a house, maybe it's a shed, a solid structure, a brick wall that's going to block the line of the radiant heat. Now, as you learned earlier, though, the radiant heat will go straight through glass. So there's no protection whatsoever through glass. So stay away from windows, and that will give you protection as well. Not foolproof, but now you're at the last resort. Now you're at last chance, and this is ways you potentially will survive. So hand back on to Raj now, because he's going to talk about places of last resort and how you can protect yourself in other circumstances that you might be confronted if you're caught out and you're in a fire.
Great, thanks, Jim. So the number one thing is to look for areas where there is no fuel load, an area of burnt ground preferably, or an area of short or low fuel. We often think of large water courses, open spaces like ovals, etc., are ideal away from the imminent fire impact. So when we talk about large water courses, rivers, dams, swimming pools, they will give you a level of protection both from the radiant heat, particularly the intensity of the radiant heat, and of course, ember attack as well. Now, this diagram or this slide also shows a stationary car. Now, vehicles by CFA regulations are not deemed places of refuge in the event of a fire attack. So it's not, cars are designed to get you from A to B. They are not made to protect you from fire. However, the CFA recognizes that there are some cases and sometimes there is no choice but to jump into a vehicle and try and stay protected from the intensity of that all-powerful radiant heat. And the way that you can do this in the vehicle, if the vehicle is drivable, number one, do not drive during the fire. This can actually be an impediment to the emergency services. You could have an accident. You could bump into other vehicles, other people because of the limited visibility. Park the vehicle away from the main road, preferably, as I say, on burnt area or low fuel load area. Place the vehicle facing the fire front so that you have the engine block between you and the advancing fire front. Then grab yourself a blanket, some water, and lower yourself into the footwell below the window line of the vehicle and into the footwell. Monitor the fire as it approaches, drink water to stay hydrated. This is an immensely tricky and very unprofessional thing to do, but yes, as a last resort, cars can be used to give you some level of protection from the advancing fire front. Now, neighbourhood safer places. I'd like to spend a bit of time just talking about our neighbourhood safer places or bushfire places of last resort. They're denoted by the green sign there and the 4 emojis of people. Now, number one, bushfire places of last resort do not guarantee safety. They are deemed places of last resort because they'll give you an element of protection from the advancing radiant heat. It will not be a comfortable experience. Don't expect a cup of cocoa and your slippers and some food. There will be nothing like that. There may not even be any emergency services present at that place of last resort. It merely provides some distance between you and the radiant heat. Now, the interesting thing here is that the nearest place of last resort to Princetown is actually in Port Campbell at the foreshore. This is some 20 kilometers away. Do you really want to be in this situation where you're going to be on the road traveling 20 kilometers during a bad fire day? This is adding more stress, burden, and also a more dangerous environment for you to be on the road. Traveling and using a place of last resort is dangerous and can lead to mental trauma, serious injury or death, traffic congestion, fire activity, accidents, fallen trees, the whole plethora of things that can happen when a fire impacts a township. We don't want to be there. We, from the CFA perspective, we do not want you to be there. And speaking to Leslie a few days ago, he doesn't want you to be there either. It's one less community member or family to think about in terms of his job protecting the township. There'll be no support services for pets of any kind at all, no foods or drink or medical services. As we move on, I just want to make some reference to some of the key things that will be available at the end of this presentation. By far, the first and most important thing is the resources tab at the end of this presentation. You'll be able to download a copy of your guide to survival, a very succinct guide to staying safe and surviving a fire. Your guide to property preparation, and that's the work of the property advice visiting service. How to keep your property safe, to buy you an extra half an hour, 1 hour perhaps in the event of fire attack. Keeping the spouting clean, keeping vegetation at a minimum, creating that break in the continuity of fuel to your home. As I mentioned earlier, we will be planning a bushfire planning workshop in your area, and I'll let Leslie Gass, your CFA captain, know about that in due course. I can't stress it how important it is to have the Vic Emergency app, and of course, contact with your local brigade. And talking to the local brigade, we have Brigade Captain Leslie Gast available on 5598-8253. Leslie is more than happy to take calls from any community members to discuss their level of fire preparation, and also the work of the CFA in the township of Princetown as well. Now, what I would like to do before we go is to launch our final poll, Jim. And the final poll will ask two very distinct questions about this presentation so that we can inform the developers of this presentation moving forward. It asks two very clear questions. Did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risk in your local area? And also, would you recommend this program to family, friends, or neighbours that live in a fire-prone area? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to answer that particular questions. That's fantastic. Any more respondents there? Because we've got 5 participants on board. Oh, Rob, you've signed in twice. That's okay. No drama. Lovely. Jim, if you want to end that poll, thank you very much for your comments there. And what I'd like to do, both Rob and Fiona, is to thank you for your time this evening. I'd like to also say that some of the content here may have been, some of you may have found it a bit emotionally disturbing. I know I find it quite graphic. But there are a couple of helpline numbers that are available there to you, Beyond Blue and Lifeline, that can offer support. And of course, the CFA has support services as well for anyone that might be impacted by the content that's contained herein. What I'm going to do now is allow Robert to speak. Rob, if you want to say a few words, feel free to unmute yourself and say. And Fiona, the same goes with you. Would you like to say a few closing comments before we finish the presentation?
I'd just like to say thank you very much for what you've done tonight. I've learned a lot. We've only been in the area for a few months, so it's good to get a bit of background on how to handle fires. Oh,
fantastic. Thanks, Robert. We appreciate your time. I know it's difficult after a long day to jump onto a webinar like this, but our job is really to give you key bits of information just to make you a bit more comfortable with handling fire and staying safe during the forthcoming fire season. We appreciate your comments, and thank you for your comments in the chat function as well.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Fiona, what about yourself?
Yes, no, it's good to be reminded. It's just a reality check. I'm aware of this, but it's good to be reminded again about what you need to do.
I think it was President Bill Clinton that said that repetition is the mother of all skills. The more times you can say something to someone, the greater the chance of it becoming ingrained. A bit like, you know, some of our health promotion messages like slip, slop, slap, and clunk, click every trip with seatbelts. It is active reinforcement. Fiona, thank you for your comments, and thank you for taking time out for being with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you one thing, where is the resources tab?
Yes, so when you close out, there's a small survey to complete, and then that takes you through to the resources tab, Rob.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, Rob. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.